I walked into Grandfather Nurgle's service, expecting one kind of revelation and found another. Once, I treated flesh as something sacred, something to guard. We were taught our bodies were the Emperor's gift, and that to preserve them was to honor him. Now my boots sink into loam that isn't really soil at all. It flexes under my weight like a sleeping lung. It exhales, warm and damp, and the breath smells of sweet fermentation and old graves. I tend beds where corpse flowers drink recollection the way normal plants drink water, drawing memories from the dying as easily as roots draw sap. My armor has stopped being armor in any meaningful way. The ceramite has gone soft, become riddled and spongy, like bone left too long in a bog. It rises and falls with my breathing. It sweats when I sweat. It rots when I rot. Tubes that once carried clean air now pulse with different offerings. Nutrients, cultures, gifts, sluicing through me in lazy tides. The chronometers died ages ago, their tiny mechanisms choked by the same fluids that now keep me alive. Time doesn't sit properly in this place anyway. It stretches, curdles, and folds back on itself. Ahead, the garden goes on without horizon, forests of towering toadstools that release drifting spore clouds. In the greenish light, they sparkle, almost beautiful, like dust caught in a cathedral sunbeam if that sunbeam had been filtered through swamp water and incense smoke. Between the fungal trunks lie puddles and lakes of bubbling filth. Things are born there with giggling mouths and bright, wet eyes. Little parasites of joy that splash and tumble before burrowing into the swollen carcasses that float like slow boats on the surface. Far off, a mound rises that might be a hill, might be a mountain, might be a body piled into geography. Its slopes are speckled with pustules that glow faintly when they weep, each drop lighting the mist for a heartbeat before it vanishes into buzzing air. The flies never stop. Their hum is constant, almost soothing, an endless choir that whispers the same message in 1,000 wings. You are loved. You are home. Nothing ends. I used to believe Grandfather's gift was freedom from pain, resilience so absolute that death itself would grow bored and wander away. Even now, as I move between beds of swollen stems, my hands working by habit, I catch myself wondering if that promise hid a trap. Because I do not feel pain anymore, not the way I once did. I do not feel much of anything in my fingers at all. I harvest progenoid glands from the fallen when they wash into my domain, and my hands, bloated, greened, half numb, perform the old rites without asking permission from my thoughts. The irony tastes bitter sometimes. Apothecary, healer, guardian of gene seed. The title rises like a bubble from deep muck. Slow, reluctant, unstoppable. It reaches the surface of my mind and pops with a gentle shock, leaving behind a thin film of memory. I remember white armor edged in green. I remember pride so sharp it could cut. I remember thinking the work was pure because it was necessary. That pride looks small now, seen through the fog of what I've become. But I still remember when the first change arrived. It was after Istvan, not the racking cough that took so many brothers at first. Mine began as something quieter, a fading sensation in the fingertips while I worked. I blamed exhaustion. I blamed toxins in the air, the clinging ash, the chemical bite of a world soaked in blood. I still believed I served the Emperor then. I still believed the purpose drilled into me since initiation. Duty like iron, faith like a blade, could not be bent. I stood over a brother whose skin had turned the pallid shade of spoiled milk. I leaned close, instruments in hand, and realized I could no longer feel the delicate balance of them. My fingers were clumsy, unreliable. Still, the work had to be done. The gene seed must be preserved, I told him. Told myself, while his breath rattled and his eyes filmed. He smiled. His lips were split, and through the gaps I saw teeth too clearly. Holes had opened in his cheeks like soft mouths learning to speak. There are other seeds being planted, Brother Malchus, he whispered. At the time, I heard only delirium. I could not yet comprehend what had already taken root within us. We thought we were escaping death through endurance. We did not realize we were being chosen, marked, claimed, adored. Not offered the cold immortality of endless duty, but something warm and damp and perpetual. Rot that never truly finishes. Rebirth that never asks permission. Now that contradiction is the garden's native language. Decay and abundance, sickness and laughter, stillness and change. All are welcome here. All contribute. Sometimes the lake delivers gifts from real space. Imperial guardsmen in tattered flak, Xenos hunters with empty eyes, green-skinned brutes still twitching with stubborn life. On rare occasions, it offers me something familiar enough to hurt. Today it brings an Astartes. He lies half-submerged in muck at the shoreline, armor scorched black and punctured in a dozen places. The plate is silver beneath the burns, and even caked in filth, it has the severe utilitarian look of the Iron Hands. Their kind once looked at my legion with contempt and called it weakness to rely on flesh. I kneel beside him and watch the last of his engineered strength fight a losing war against what is already blooming inside him. His augmetic eye crackles and whirs as it tries to focus. The other eye, human, red-rimmed, furious, locks onto me. "Traitor!" he spits. Blood bubbles at his lips, thick and dark. I smile, and the skin of my face pulls tight. It makes a sound like old leather splitting. "There is no betrayal in the garden," I tell him. "Only arrival." My hand rests on his chest. The ceramite is shattered there. Beneath it, I feel twin hearts laboring. The rhythm is stubborn, determined, almost admirable. Grandfather cherishes such qualities. They make surrender richer when it finally comes. "I bring you something," I say, and reach to my belt. Once, vials were glass and steel. In this place, nothing stays that clean for long. The container I remove is a translucent membrane, faintly veined, pulsing in time with the living liquid inside. The fluid shifts color as if thinking. Yellow, then darker, then bright again. "It will ease you," I say. "I embrace pain," he growls. "Pain tempers will. It is the forge." I nod, because even now I can respect a creed spoken with conviction. "Yes," I agree. "Pain teaches endurance, but it is a small teacher. It shows you only how to resist." I tilt the vial and let the blessing slide into the wound. It is thick, and it moves as if it has purpose, seeking torn organs, threading through damaged tissue, making itself at home. The iron hand arches. A sound escapes him, half gasp, half prayer. The augmetic eye stutters. His remaining eye widens, then, slowly, softens, as though something inside him has unknotted. "What is this?" he whispers, and the hatred in his voice thins into raw wonder. "The first mercy," I tell him, "the loosening of fear, the acceptance of what all men know and refuse to hold. Death is not an enemy to be beaten. It is a doorway." He stares up at me, and in the polished lens of his bionic eye I see my own reflection. I'm barely human now. Skin the color of swamp bark stretched tight over a skull that has grown wrong. Bone horns rise from my temples and curve back like a mockery of a crown. My eyes have sunk deep, glowing with pale yellow light. My mouth has no lips. My teeth have fused into ridged plates made less for tearing than for grinding. Vegetation, fungus, whatever the garden offers. And yet he does not recoil. Curiosity takes him first. Then something like recognition. "The pain," he murmurs. "It's changing." "Yes." I lean closer, and my breath is fetid and warm and wet. Pain is denial, brother. A refusal to let go. Accept the change. Welcome the decay. The sensation becomes what it truly is. His voice is faint now, threaded with tremors as the blessing spreads. What is it truly?" "Pleasure," I whisper, A shudder runs through him, and the sound he makes is almost a laugh. His armor begins to soften at the seams. A greenish hue creeps across the silver. Tiny mushroom caps push up from joints and rivets, delicate as newborn teeth. Where metal meets flesh, a new communion forms. Organic filaments exploring gears and pistons, repurposing machinery designed for war into something that can host life. "What's happening to me?" he asks, but the question holds no fear, only awe. "You are being remade," I say. "As I was, as all who enter this place are. Grandfather sees potential in you, the strength, the discipline, the certainty. He turns such things to truer purpose." He swallows, eyes fluttering. "The Emperor," he breathes. "The Emperor protects. The Emperor promises you war without end." I answer gently. "Duty, sacrifice, pain, that is his eternity. Grandfather offers rest inside the cycle, a place where decay is not shame and rebirth is not denial." His eyes close for a moment. When they open, his lips curve in an unmistakable smile. "I can feel them," he whispers. "Inside me, so many, hungry, happy." I nod, satisfied. They are his children, companions, teachers. Some resist them for a long while. "You are wiser than most." He lies back into the breathing soil, not as a victim, but as a supplicant. The garden will guide him from here. Perhaps he will become a tiller, a keeper of plots and beds. Perhaps grandfather will find another use for an iron hand's particular talent for craft and endurance. It doesn't matter. All serve. All feed the garden. I return to my corpse flowers. They have grown impatient while I was away. Thick stems sway, and atop each bloom sits a crown of tiny skulls, miniature, chattering, their teeth no bigger than grains of sand. Their petals are bruised purple and sickly pink, like flesh pressed too long against cold metal. They hunger the way all living things hunger here, not for meat, but for meaning. At my waist hangs a pouch that is no longer a pouch. It has become an organ, a swollen sac grown from my abdomen, warm and faintly translucent. I reach into it and withdraw a handful of pearls. They are small, milky, and each one holds a fragment of life. A laugh from a childhood I never lived, a soldier's last thought of home, the sting of pride, the ache of fear, the sudden calm of acceptance. I press these pearls into the waiting mouths of the flowers. They nibble with delicate, almost tender motions. As they feed, they excrete nectar, thick, fragrant, precious. I catch it in a chalice that was once part of my old kit, its purpose transformed but its shape still faintly familiar. This distillation of experience will be poured into grandfather's cauldron. It will add flavor, texture, nuance to the ever-evolving plague that is his great work. The labor satisfies me in a way my old duties never did. Then I fought death as if it were failure. Now I see it as sacred function. The dead nourish the garden. The garden returns them to the cycle. Simple, unending, beautiful. And yet, there are moments, brief as the bubbles that rise and pop on the lake's surface, when doubt scratches at me. Not doubt of grandfather's affection. That is constant, undeniable, surrounding me like the fly-hum choir. Not doubt that I belong here. I have never felt more fitted. No, the doubt is stranger. An irritation beneath fused armor I cannot reach to scratch. A question about the one I used to be. The apothecary who tried to mend, to preserve, to protect. Was there worth in that struggle? Was there purpose in resisting decay? I should not think this way. I should remember the past only with scorn. But memory is stubborn, and the garden is generous with what it grows. I recall a battlefield that was not Istvan, some nameless world under a grey sky. We fought warriors in blue, proud and immaculate, ultramarines. I dragged a wounded brother behind a fallen pillar carved with symbols I did not understand. His leg was gone at the knee, severed by a power sword, the wound cauterized by the same strike. He tried to push me away. "Leave me," he insisted. "I can still fire. I can still kill." "You are not expendable," I told him, preparing a stim injection to keep him awake, fighting, alive long enough for extraction. I spoke the mantra like a prayer. The gene seed must be preserved. He laughed, harsh, bitter, pained. "Always the gene seed, Malchus, as if that's all we are. Carriers, vessels." I didn't answer. I focused on the ritual of care. Assess, cleanse, bind, inject. But his words lodged inside me where I couldn't remove them. Are we just vessels? Back then, I didn't know. Now I do. We are vessels, yes, but not for the Emperor's cold design. Not for a Primarch's ambition. We are vessels for life in its messy, crawling abundance. Gardens, ecosystems, worlds within worlds, a million interdependent organisms thriving in communion. When I glanced toward the shoreline again, the Iron Hand has progressed quickly. He is sitting up now, examining himself with fascination. The augmetics that once defined his chapter's harsh identity are being swallowed into something stranger and more intimate. His silver arm, more machine than man, now sprouts fungal tendrils that probe gears and pistons, discovering new purposes for old war tools. "Brother Malchus," he calls, voice thick with phlegm and revelation. I understand. I watch him, curious despite myself. "The Omnissiah," he says slowly. "The machine god we venerated. It was always this, wasn't it? The joining of flesh and mechanism, not in sterile purity, in glorious corruption." I smile. Grandfather teaches each according to their nature. He rises unsteadily. Fluids drip from joints now inhabited by colonies of unseen workers, bacteria that digest metal and excrete compounds no Imperial magos would dare name. He looks out across the garden as if seeing it for the first time. "What is my purpose here?" he asks. "How do I serve?" I gesture to the endless landscape of contradictions. "Find where you fit. Listen to the voices living in your blood and bone. They know the will here better than any sermon." He nods at once. Acceptance brings its own kind of knowledge. Then he turns and walks away into the green-lit haze, drawn toward whatever task waits for him. I watch with a slow satisfaction. Another brother welcomed. Another vessel filled. My flowers fold inward in brief dormancy, petals curling into tight spirals. They will bloom again soon, bigger, brighter, more vibrant, nourished by what they consumed. While they rest, I patrol the edge of my plot. The garden is peaceful, but never still. It reshapes itself with grandfather's whims and with every new scrap torn from real space. Sometimes enemies breach the veil, warriors of the Imperium, Xenos raiders, fools who believe they can burn a god's domain clean. They never last. The garden does not need armies to defend it. The air itself is a weapon. The ground is hunger. Even victory becomes compost. At the lake's edge, I find something that does not belong. Half buried in muck is a small object that gleams with a cleanliness so unnatural it hurts the eye. I crouch and lift it free. A medallion. A simple circle of silvery metal, resisting corrosion that should have claimed it 100 times over. Etched on its surface is a symbol I recognize instantly. The prime helix, the mark of an apothecary. My throat tightens in a way it shouldn't. That itch beneath fused armor flares. It was mine once. I wore it beneath my plate as a reminder of oaths. Preserve life, honor the gene seed, serve the Legion, and through it, the Emperor. Oaths I broke, oaths I outgrew. I should throw it back into the bubbling lake, watch it sink, watch even that stubborn metal eventually accept grandfather's blessing. Instead, I close my fist around it. The edges press into soft flesh. The sensation is dull, distant, but real enough to sting. "A keepsake, Brother Malchus?" The voice is wet, gurgling, like a drain clogged with living things. I turn. A plague marine stands at the boundary of my plot. His armor was once the same proud green my own used to be. but now it has darkened into the color of a bruised corpse. His helmet is gone. What remains of his face has collapsed inward, as if the skull dissolved and left behind a hollow cavity filled with writhing shapes. Occasionally, something peeks out through the holes where eyes and mouth should be, curious as children. "Festergo," I say, recognizing him by stance, by presence, by the old familiarity beneath the ruin. "What brings you here?" He lifts a hand. The fingers have split into tentacular digits, each tipped with a hooked claw. The gesture is almost polite. "Grandfather sends regards," he burbles. He is pleased. "The nectar you produce, it has a particular sweetness. Nostalgic. I should feel pride. Instead, a cold weight settles in my chest. Like something that should have rotted away long ago has hardened into a stone. I serve," I answer carefully, "as I always have, to the best of my ability." Festergo tilts his head. It is a curious motion given the fluid nature of what passes for his features. "Do you?" he asks softly. "Do you truly serve as you always have?" Danger pricks at me. Not from him. He could crush me if he wished, but from the doubt his question touches, the doubt that has taken root like a blight I did not plant. I force a smile. My desiccated lips crack. "The methods change," I say. "The purpose remains. Life, death, rebirth. The cycle continues." Festergo makes a sound that might be laughter, might be something inside him collapsing. "Well spoken, apothecary," he says. "Well spoken indeed." He steps closer. The ground squelches under his weight. "Grandfather has prepared something for you," he continues. "A new strain, freshly cultivated. Unusual properties. He believes it will suit your particular talents." My fist tightens around the medallion until the metal bites into flesh. I nod as if I feel only gratitude. But beneath the fly-hum choir, beneath the garden's breathing soil, beneath the warmth of rot and rebirth, the old itch persists. Patient, unreachable, and very much alive. From the living pouch at Festoog's waist, something that pulsed like an extra lung, he drew out a small wet relic. At first glance it resembled a human heart, but wrong in every proportion, as if it had been turned inside out and taught to beat anyway. Its chambers were exposed, its vessels braided into unfamiliar loops. It throbbed with a slow, intentional rhythm, and with each pulse it flung beads of black ichor onto the soil. "Plant it," Festoog said, voice bubbling like a clogged drain. "Center of your plot. Feed it with the nectar you harvest. It will become magnificent." I received it as one receives a sacrament, carefully, reverently, cradling the organ in hands that suddenly felt too crude to touch something so direct, so unmistakably bestowed. The gift was warm. Not comforting warm, but incubator warm, as if it had already decided to grow. "What will it become?" I asked. Festoog's ruined face shifted in a way that might once have been a smile. "That depends on you, brother. On how you tend it, what you feed it, what you choose to remember, what you choose to become." Then he turned away, lumbering off through the garden with the ponderous grace all plague marines share. Heavy steps, patient certainty, as if the ground itself moved aside for him. I watched him go, the heart beating steadily in my hands. And in my other fist, hidden against my palm like a crime, I still held the medallion. Two objects, two weights, two symbols that refused to be just symbols. Past and future, duty and devotion, preservation and decay. I looked down at the organ again. It was exquisite in its own grotesque logic. Veins and arteries rearranged into patterns no imperial anatomist would recognize. A blueprint written in flesh instead of ink. It was artistry in the way lightning is artistry. Violent, inevitable, beautiful because it does not ask permission. With careful steps, I crossed to the center of my plot, where the soil was richest, fed by runoff from the corpse flowers and the occasional overflow from the lake's bubbling margin. I knelt and dug with my hands. The earth squirmed against my fingers, eager, alive, sensing a new thing approaching. When I set the heart into the shallow hollow, the ground lifted toward it like a mouth closing over food. In moments, it was buried, yet the surface above it continued to pulse, the rhythm visible in the rising and sinking of the loam, synchronized with the hidden beat below. Even as I watched, pale shoots pushed up through the soil, translucent, trembling, reaching into the greenish air with searching tendrils. Work completed, I opened my other hand. The prime helix lay there, too clean for this place, its geometry stark against the garden's organic chaos. It should have disgusted me. It should have felt like a dead thing washed up where it no longer belonged. I should have thrown it back into the lake. Instead, I pressed it hard into my palm. The metal did not resist the way it should have. My flesh softened around it as if remembering an old wound. The medallion sank beneath the skin and disappeared, leaving only a faint bulge and a new pulse, subtle but undeniable, like a second heartbeat nested inside my hand. Not an ornament, not a badge, a question made solid. A reminder that even here, even in the embrace of grandfather's love, choices still existed. The corpse flowers began to stir behind me, their brief dormancy ending. Their stems unwound, their bruised petals opened. The tiny skull crowns atop them chattered in hungry anticipation. I returned to my work and harvested what nectar I could, as I always did. But as I worked, I felt the medallion within my flesh. Small, hard, certain, in a world where everything else was soft enough to change. And for the first time since I entered the garden, a thought came uninvited. Not back, never back, but forward, towards something neither the Emperor nor the Great Father had planned. Something that would belong to me alone. The thought was heresy. The thought was freedom. The thought was a seed. It settled beside the heart I had planted, unseen, waiting to bloom. I was not alone in the garden, not even close. Grandfather's realm was vast beyond mortal scale, a dimension unto itself, reflecting his boundless appetite for new life and new endings. My plot was one of countless millions, each tended by some devoted caretaker, each producing its own strange contribution to the whole. Sometimes, at grandfather's whim, we gathered, tenders of rot and rebirth, to trade specimens, exchange knowledge, and share communion in the decay that bound us. The summons came as bells, not clean, ringing chimes, but a damp, muffled dirge that still carried everywhere. Through fungus forests and across lakes of filth, through the ribbed tunnels of things that should not have lived. The sound rolled over the garden like a slow tide, and every tender heard it in their bones. I collected what nectar I could, thick, pearlescent fluid stored in the organ pouches along my abdomen, and began the journey. The path shifted as I walked. The garden rearranged itself to facilitate our convergence. A winding trail between mushroom fields became a causeway across a bog of liquefied flesh. Then the causeway became a tunnel carved through the ribcage of some titanic beast whose organs still worked, pumping gases and fluids through systems that should have failed ages ago. At last, I emerged into a vast clearing dominated by the tree. It rose impossibly tall, its bark like compressed bone, its branches thrusting out like the spokes of a diseased wheel. Bells hung from those branches by the thousands, iron, brass, unknown alloys, swaying in a breeze I could not feel. Their tolling made the air taste of damp earth and old medicine. At the base of the tree stood a ring of standing stones. They were not carved by tools, but worn by time and pressure. Bodies pressed against them for ages, leaving impressions of faces, hands, limbs, organs, as if the rock itself had learned to remember pain. Within that circle, dozens of tenders waited. Some I recognized. Old Death Guard, once my brothers in another life. Others were things that might have been human or Xenos or something else entirely. Forms so transformed that origin became guesswork. They nodded, gurgled greetings, studied one another with the careful attention of craftsmen comparing blades. Each had brought an offering. One carried a bubbling cauldron of experimental brew, fumes changing color as they rose. Another led a shambling creation on a chain of rusted links, the creature obedient in a way that felt wrong. Others brought nothing but themselves, their bodies as living laboratories, their flesh already busy with new strains. Then the crowd parted. Beneath the great tree's shadow stood a figure both familiar and utterly impossible. He towered over even the largest plague marines. Corpulent, yes, massive, with abundance, yet somehow graceful, like a monarch who did not need speed to command space. His flesh housed countless infestations in perfect harmony. Ecosystems living inside ecosystems, all thriving in the same rotting cathedral of a body. Antlers of bone and horn rose from his skull, branching like the tree above, as if he wore the garden's shape as a crown. His face held the gentle lines of a grandfather, kind, patient, amused, despite the writhing larvae in his eye sockets and the ruin where his nose should have been. Nurgle, the Great Father, the Lord of Decay, and of the life that crawls out of decay, laughing. His presence filled the clearing with something that made no sense alongside horror. Joy. Acceptance. Love so profound it bypassed revulsion and went straight into the marrow. Even as my flesh crawled under his attention, I felt understood in ways the Emperor's light had never offered. "My children," he spoke, and his voice was the sound of bodies breaking down into soil, of flies buzzing, of fluid bubbling in diseased lungs. "My precious, perfect children, show me, share your gifts, feed our great work." One by one, the tenders approached. A plague marine offered a chalice of liquid that changed color every heartbeat, cycling through hues no human tongue had words for. Nurgle dipped a bloated finger into it, tasted, nodded. "Delicious," he declared. "A worthy addition. Dreams of the dying distilled. Well done, my son." A hunched figure, once perhaps Eldari, presented a crystal sphere. Within it, tiny humanoid shapes endlessly dissolved and reformed, trapped in perpetual transformation. Nurgle held it up, amused as a child with an insect. "Exquisite," he chuckled. "Soul stuff caught between states. Neither alive nor dead, neither matter nor spirit. A delightful paradox." So it continued. Each offering received with genuine enthusiasm, each tender praised, no matter how modest the contribution. Grandfather's affection was strangely democratic, lavished on all who served him with equal warmth. When my turn came, I stepped forward, head bowed. From the organ pouches along my abdomen, I released the nectar I had harvested. Thick, luminous fluid that caught the garden's light in strange ways, as if galaxies of bacteria and fungi swam inside it in perfect microcosm. "Ah," Nurgle murmured, voice softening. "My faithful apothecary, always precise, always attentive to the small truths." He cupped his enormous hands beneath mine, and I let the nectar pour into his palms. He raised it to his face and inhaled deeply. His expression turned contemplative, almost reverent. "Fascinating," he said. "The fear of a child torn from its mother as a world dies. The determination of a soldier who fights though he knows the cause is lost. The quiet collapse of a priest whose faith has turned to dust." He drank it in one long, slurping swallow, then belched, an earth-shaking sound that made the bells above tremble and sing. "Excellent," he declared. "You enrich the garden in ways only you can." I should have felt pride. Instead, that cold weight returned in my chest, the crystallized doubt I could not scrape away. In my palm, beneath the skin, the medallion pulsed, a hard counterbeat to the garden's soft rhythm. "Great Father," I heard myself say, the words escaping before I could swallow them. "A brother has given me a new specimen, a heart unlike any I've seen." Nurgle's perpetual good humor sharpened into focus. Not anger, attention. "Ah," he nodded slowly. "Yes, that one, a special project." His gaze pressed into me like gravity. "It grows well, I trust." "It grows," I said carefully. "Into what, I cannot yet tell." Nurgle chuckled, and the sound rolled like distant thunder across a battlefield. "That is the beauty of my gifts," he said. They are not fixed. They answer their environment, the care they receive, the intention behind that care. He leaned forward until his rotting face was close to mine. In the folds of his flesh I could see entire universes of life, species blooming and collapsing in the span of heartbeats, evolving and devolving in endless experimentation. "What is your intention, apothecary?" he asked gently. "What will you nurture this gift into becoming?" The question struck like a blow. Intention. For so long I had simply served, accepted, existed, moved within the cycle like a cog moving within a machine, only this machine was organic, laughing, warm. But the heart, the medallion, the memories that kept surfacing like bubbles from a swamp, they demanded more than obedience. "I intend to honor your gift," I replied. Safe words, careful words. To nurture it as it deserves. Nurgle's smile widened, splitting his face in a way that should have been terrifying. Teeth gleamed, some rotted stumps, some sharp and bright. "A diplomatic answer," he said fondly. "My cautious son." Then his eyes, those impossible pits alive with crawling devotion, seemed to look through me. "But I see what writhes beneath your words," he continued, voice still warm. "You harbor doubts. You question. For an instant, something I thought I had lost returned. Fear, sharp as a needle. To be seen so clearly, exposed before the Great Father and all assembled, should have meant annihilation. The garden had no place for rejection. And yet Nurgle's smile did not fade. If anything, it grew softer. "Do not fear," he said. "Doubt is natural. Doubt is healthy. Doubt is decay." He placed a massive hand on my shoulder, its weight nearly driving me to my knees. Decay breaks down certainty to make room for new growth. His voice lowered, intimate. "I did not choose you for this gift to reward blind obedience. The heart requires a tender who questions, who seeks, who chooses." Relief flooded me, followed by bewilderment. Then, "It is a test," I managed. Nurgle chuckled. "Everything is a test, my son. Everything is an experiment. Everything is an opportunity to grow, to change, to discover." He straightened and addressed the circle as a whole. "That is what the followers of the false emperor never understood," he proclaimed. "They crave stasis, preservation, denial of death. In denying decay, they deny life itself. Without change, without the breaking down of the old, how can anything new be born? How can anything flourish?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered tenders like wind through fungus, and yet the cold weight remained within me. Because if change was essential, if transformation was the only constant, then what exactly was I becoming? What waited beyond acceptance? Nurgle's gaze returned to me, and I knew he read the question as easily as one reads ink. "Go," he instructed gently. "Tend your plot. Nurture your gift. Follow where it leads. That is all I ask of any of my children." He dismissed me then, turning his attention to the next tender, and I backed away with bowed head, careful steps, respectful posture. But as I left the circle, I felt eyes on me, some curious, some envious, some suspicious. To be singled out in the garden's complex ecology was both blessing and danger. I quickened my pace. The path shifted again as I hurried home, but this time it felt different. Less like grandfather's whim and more like the garden responding to my urgency. As if the realm itself tuned to emotion, reflecting its inhabitants the way a lake reflects a storm. By the time my plot came into view, I was running. The corpse flowers swayed in agitation as I passed. The soil beneath my boots pulsed faster, as if the heart I'd planted had heard my return and answered with increased hunger. When I reached the center of my domain, I stopped. The gift had grown. What had been a small inverted organ was now a mound of living tissue nearly the size of an Astarte's torso. The pale shoots had become thick, ropey vines spreading outward in all directions, intertwining with the corpse flowers, burrowing into the soil, reaching toward the diffuse green light. I knelt, apothecary instincts rising even through rot. These were not ordinary vines. They were veins and arteries made vast, carrying fluids that ranged from clear plasma to thick, dark blood. The mound pulsed with multiple rhythms, as if several hearts beat within it, slightly out of sync. And then I realized the strangest thing. It was not silent. It did not thump like a simple organ. It whispered, a chorus of voices too faint to form words, yet laden with emotion that bypassed my ears and resonated directly in my mind. Sorrow braided with joy, anger tangled with peace. A symphony of feeling, as if countless lives were being remembered at once. My hand lifted, hovering above the wet surface. Beneath the skin of my palm, the medallion throbbed in counterpoint, sometimes harmonious, sometimes discordant, like two songs sharing the same air, but refusing the same melody. "What are you?" I whispered. In answer, the mound split. Not a bloody wound, something cleaner, almost deliberate, a seam parting to reveal a cavity within. The interior glistened, lined with structures like the villi of an intestine, but larger, more complex, arranged with unsettling purpose. And at the center of that cavity floated a small crystalline object, turning slowly, catching the garden's light and breaking it into prismatic shards. I did not decide to reach for it. My hand moved anyway. My fingers touched crystal, and sensation slammed through me. Not pain, remembrance. Not the borrowed fragments I harvested from the dying, but my own memories, sealed away beneath layers of acceptance and transformation. They burst open, like a vault, giving way. I remembered my induction into the Death Guard, the pride of being chosen, the certainty of resilience, the early days when duty felt like truth and truth felt unbreakable. And somewhere beneath that cascade, the seed of a different question stirred, alive beside the heart's growing pulse, waiting for its moment to bloom. The crystal did not show me borrowed lives this time. It hurled mine back into me. I saw myself on a smoke-choked field, the first brother I ever pulled back from the edge. My hands were steady then, steady in a way I had forgotten was possible. Shrapnel lodged in a primary heart, the rhythm stuttering, fading. I remember the clean logic of triage, the precise incision, the careful extraction, and then the sharp snap of a controlled pulse, electricity obeying discipline, until the heart remembered its duty and began again. I remembered Mortarion too, not as a legend carved into banners, but as he truly was, tall, grim, purposeful, a silhouette that made fear feel childish. His voice did not promise comfort, it promised endurance. Be stronger than pain, stronger than fear, stronger than death. We took those words into our marrow like medicine, and I remembered the turning. Not a single theatrical moment with thunder and vows. No mythic knife stroke. It was slower than that, worse than that. A sequence of small allowances, tactics we once would have spat on, justified because the war demanded it. A loyalty that slid, grain by grain, from a distant emperor to a present Primarch who asked more, and always with that same cold certainty. This is necessary. And beneath it all, the first faint murmur of other voices, new gods who did not ask for sacrifice as repayment, but offered reward as bait. I tore my hand away from the crystal as if it had bitten me. Air rasped into lungs that no longer deserved the name. The tide of memory receded, leaving me shaking, not with pain, but with the aftershock of clarity. The cavity in the heart mound sealed itself. Flesh folded, smoothed, became seamless again. The growth returned to its quiet pulsing and that low, wordless choir that seeped into thought instead of sound. But I did not return to what I was. In my palm, under the skin, the buried medallion seemed to flare, not hot, not burning in any physical sense, but bright with certainty. A hard point of meaning in a realm where everything softened and changed. I stood mind-racing. The planted heart was not merely an exotic specimen, not just another of grandfather's clever jokes made of anatomy and hunger. It was a mirror, a catalyst, A key pushed into a lock I hadn't admitted existed. Grandfather had told me to follow where it led. Had he known what road it might open? Did even a god of cycles truly understand the variables he planted? A rustle answered my thoughts. I turned and froze. One of my corpse flowers had torn itself free. It was sliding toward me on petal feet, impossibly fast, leaving a wet shimmer in its wake. It stopped just short of my boots and tilted its tiny skull crown upward. Empty sockets stared with a curiosity that felt uncomfortably intelligent. "Have you come for feeding?" I asked it, reaching toward my pouch of memory pearls out of old habit. The flower chittered, and its skull face opened, not into a hungry maw, into a mouth that held a small, perfectly formed human tongue. "Not hunger," it hissed, each word like dead leaves dragged across stone. "Warning!" I lowered myself, bringing my ruined face closer to that impossible messenger. Warning of what? The tongue flicked. The skull crown angled as if listening to sounds I couldn't hear. "Eyes," it whispered. Others' eyes. Not patient, not kind. My gaze snapped to the perimeter of my plot. At first I saw only the usual. Undulating ground, fungal thickets, the lake's bubbling edge. Then, movement. Stillness pretending not to be seen. A figure stood near the border where my domain met the filth water, half hidden behind a writhing wall of tentacular fungus. A plague marine, bloated and heavy, watching without shifting an inch. He wasn't Death Guard. Under the rot and growth, beneath the grime, I could make out the ghost of old heraldry. Some other lineage, swallowed but not erased. An outsider, welcomed into the garden, yes, but not mine. Why would he watch me? The flower's tongue clicked against teeth that were too small and too perfect. "The heart," it whispered, as if reading the shape of my thoughts. "They feel it. They want it." I looked back at the mound. It pulsed like a secret. If others could sense it from the border, then it wasn't only unusual, it was valuable. Valuable things were never left alone for long, even here. "Thank you," I murmured to the flower. "Return to your sisters. Continue your work." It chittered once, almost pleased, then slid away, leaving a faint trail of nectar that the soil drank greedily. I stayed kneeling, weighing choices. I could confront the watcher and drive him off. Announce myself as a threat, turn a shadow into a conflict. I could appeal to my old brothers, invoke whatever hierarchy still clung together among us like mold on stone. Ask Festergo, ask the others, ask for protection. Or I could do what the apothecary and me had always done best. Pretend calm, build contingencies, and let preparation do the killing. That third option felt familiar, so I chose it. I returned to my duties as if nothing had changed, harvesting nectar, sorting memory pearls, feeding the corpse flowers that still behaved like plants. All the while, I kept the watcher at the corner of my awareness, noted when he shifted, noted when, briefly, he was replaced by another swollen silhouette. They didn't enter, they only watched, which meant fear lived somewhere inside their patience, fear of grandfather's attention, or fear of the heart itself. Either way, their caution bought me time. When the garden's light dimmed, its imitation of night settling over everything, I began to arrange my plot the way a surgeon arranges instruments. From my beds I harvested fungi whose spores brought heavy sleep, vines whose sap clouded sight into white fog, flowers whose pollen scattered orientation, turned memory into drifting scraps. I placed them in rings around the central mound. Not lethal, not dramatic, but effective. Obstacles meant to slow a determined intruder, to make them blink, stumble, hesitate. Then I returned to the heart. It had grown again. The vascular network now reached toward the very edges of my domain, veins and arteries writ across the soil like a map. The pulses traveling through them felt informed, as if fluid carried more than nutrients, as if it carried signals. I knelt beside the mound and placed both hands on its slick surface. "Show me," I whispered. "Show me what you are." The flesh split open, obedient. The cavity yawned wide, wet and glistening, and the crystal floated within like a captured star. This time I didn't hesitate. I plunged my arm into the warm interior and closed my hand around the crystal. The surge hit harder than before. Memories, possibilities, branching paths, enough to drown a lesser mind. But I was not lesser. I'd structured my thoughts like I once structured triage. Channel, prioritize, survive. I saw myself as I had been, as I became, as I might have been. One thread, loyalty intact, death on Istvan, my gene seed lost to the ash and the betrayal. Another, full surrender, not merely a gardener, but a champion. An instrument of plague, a living vector for grandfather's most exquisite cruelties. And another thread, thin as a scalpel edge, a path between. Not loyal, not damned, something new, something that didn't fit the old categories. A shape the Imperium had no word for, a shape the warp couldn't name yet. The crystal pulsed in my fist like a question that demanded an answer. In my palm, the buried medallion throbbed back, discordant, almost painful in its insistence. Choice, not fate, not destiny, not even a god's will. Choice. What do you want from me? I asked the crystal, and my voice echoed strangely inside the living cavity. Images answered, not words. A battlefield layered in corpses of every faction, every species, proof that war never runs out of mouths to feed. A laboratory of tanks where Astartes' forms floated in fluid, half-made horrors with familiar silhouettes. A throne room where a withered corpse sat neglected, its light dimming toward extinction. A garden where nothing grew but a single perfect rose, blood red, eternal, lonely. Metaphors, warnings, invitations, not answers, not commands. I understood then. The crystal wasn't an oracle. It was a lens, a tool for amplifying intention. My intention. And with that understanding came a colder realization that made my rotted heart stutter. Grandfather had not planted this simply to test my loyalty. He had planted it because even gods can become repetitive. Even decay can become predictable. Even eternity can fall into boredom. I was the variable, the wild card, the catalyst he couldn't fully calculate. My doubts weren't flaws. They were the reason I had been chosen. The crystal pulsed one last time and began to melt. Not like ice, like wax warmed by purpose. It flowed, conformed to my grip and then to my flesh. A sensation of rightness spread through my arm as it merged, not painful, not violent, but complete, like an organ returning to its proper socket. In my palm, the old medallion rose through softened layers of tissue as if cold. The two met. Imperial emblem and warp-born crystal fused into something neither side could claim. A shock wave rolled outward from my body, rippling across the plot. Corpse flowers bowed as if in wind. Vines writhed. The soil heaved and settled. I pulled my hand free and stared. Where the medallion had been, where the crystal had become, a living emblem now adorned my palm, part organic, part mechanical, part psychic pattern. It resembled the prime helix, but changed. Two spirals still, yes, but now, third strand. Wound between them, weaving a new logic into an old symbol. Life, death, and something else, unnamed. Behind me, the heart mound sealed again, and immediately began to transform. The pulsing mass stretched upward, limbs suggested themselves, then formed. A torso, a head. The surrounding vine network retracted, drawn back into the body as if the whole plot were being harvested into a single shape. Within minutes, a figure stood where the mound had been, humanoid, Astartes-sized. Its surface still rippled, features forming and dissolving like thoughts trying on faces. But the outline held, stable enough to matter. Where a face should be was only smooth flesh. Yet I felt its attention on me with terrifying precision. "What are you?" I asked, though part of me already knew. It raised a hand in imitation of mine, and from its palm blossomed the same evolved helix symbol. No mouth, no speech, but the meaning landed in my mind like a verdict. I am you. You are me. We are becoming something else. A commotion snapped me back to the perimeter. The Watchers had abandoned subtlety. 3 plague marines advanced into my territory. Outsiders, not Death Guard, each mutated in different grotesque ways. They carried weapons that were crude but brutally serviceable. Axes, flails, iron-bound clubs crusted with the history of old battle. Apothecary, the lead one called, voice wet through a throat half ruined by acid. Grandfather sends regards. He regrets your experiment must end. Early. I heard the lie immediately. Grandfather had spoken to me himself. He had told me to follow the heart's lead, to nurture it by my own intention. These were not messengers. They were rivals. Servants who feared what I might become, and what that might cost them. The Great Father addressed me directly, I said, stepping beside the faceless figure. You were not there. You did not hear him choose me. The leader spat a glob of black ichor that hissed where it hit the soil. Grandfather has many projects, he sneered. Some succeed, some fail, some get repurposed. They fanned out, trying to flank me and the construct, moving with the heavy confidence of those who believe resistance is impossible. They didn't understand what had grown here. I lifted my hand so the evolved helix caught the garden's dim light. It pulsed, casting wrong shadows. I suggest you reconsider, I warned. They hesitated, just for a heartbeat, sensing something outside their experience. Then arrogance filled the gap where caution had been. Take them, the leader barked, raising his axe. They charged. My defenses woke. Spores erupted in thick clouds. Vines snapped up to tangle greaves and drag boots sideways. Pollen drifted into their helms, making their steps uncertain, their direction wrong. They pushed through anyway, slowed but not stopped, stubborn as Astartes always are. I turned to the construct, suddenly unsure. It had no weapon, no claws, no obvious means of war. The first Marine broke through the final ring. The construct moved, not like a brute, like liquid learning shape. It reached out and placed a hand on the attacker's chest. The Marine froze, rigid, motionless, yet it wasn't paralysis that held him. It was recognition. The construct's flesh flowed outward from the point of contact, enveloping the plague marine in a living shroud that beat with the same layered rhythms as the heart mound had. For a moment, they stood locked together in a terrible embrace. Then the shroud withdrew, sliding back into the construct as if nothing had happened. The marine remained standing, unwounded, still corrupted, but changed where it mattered most. The mindless aggression had drained from his posture. The slavish obedience had fallen away like a shed skin. In its place was something rare in this realm: awareness, agency, choice. The other 2 attackers faltered. Their leader lifted his axe higher as if it could ward off understanding. Sorcery, he accused. Understanding, I corrected softly. The truest gift beneath all the rot. The transformed Marine turned to face his former comrades. His voice, when it came, was clearer than the usual gurgle. Still ruined, but purposeful. I remember, he said. I was Sergeant Cassis, Imperial Fists. I fell defending a shrine world. I was offered salvation in servitude, and I accepted without reading the cost. The leader stumbled back, confusion and fear wrestling with fury across his half-melted features. Grandfather's love is enough, he insisted. His love is everything. His love is real, I said. But love without choice isn't love. It's consumption. The construct stepped toward the second attacker. That one swung his flail in panic. The weapon passed through the construct's body as if through water, distorting it for a heartbeat, doing no lasting harm. Then the construct touched him. The shroud bloomed again. Communion, withdrawal. Another Marine stood changed beside Cassis. This one straightened slowly, spine cracking as if remembering pride. Codicia Vorax, he rasped. Alpha Legion, though loyal in truth. I died poisoned by my own when they discovered I would not turn. Grandfather found what was left of me, and I accepted continuation. The leader was alone now, axe trembling, courage evaporating under the weight of the impossible. Grandfather won't allow this, he stammered. This perversion, this defiance. It isn't defiance, I said, stepping forward with the construct at my side. It's growth, it's change, it's the principle he embodies. Stagnation is the Emperor's sin, not Grandfather's. He searched my face, then the construct, then his transformed comrades, hunting for a flaw he could strike. Finding none, he spat the oldest refuge of the faithful. Heresy, I laughed, and the sound startled me. It wasn't the wet chuckle of a plague marine. It was cleaner, closer to the man I used to be. Heresy implies an orthodoxy, I said. And chaos, by its nature, can't sustain one. That's its strength and its weakness. The construct extended a hand toward the final marine. He raised his axe to strike, yet doubt had already crept into his stance, into the set of his shoulders, into the way his breath hitched as if his body remembered that it once belonged to someone with a name. And in that hesitation, I felt the garden shift. Not at Grandfather's whim. At mean. The axe came down late, and when it finally landed, it did so with the tired hesitation of a man already losing. The blade bit into the construct's shoulder. For an instant, there was resistance. Then the living surface yielded, swallowing the iron edge as if metal were only another kind of nutrient. The wound tried to exist, tried to bleed meaning into the moment, and failed. Flesh knitted shut around the embedded weapon, closing with impatient speed. Then the construct touched him. The veil unfurled, soft, pulsing tissue flowing outward into a cocoon, and the communion began. But this one fought. Inside the living shroud, I saw him thrash, not against pain, but against revelation. He rejected the offered understanding as if it were poison. The cocoon held him, pressed truth against his mind, insisted on memory, insisted on choice, and he refused. When the shroud withdrew, it did not withdraw with a gift. It withdrew with a wreck. He collapsed to his knees, not awakened, not changed, simply broken. His beliefs and the thing he had been shown could not be reconciled. Corruption had already splintered his identity into brittle fragments. Remembrance struck those fragments like a hammer. Some minds were not ready to become whole again. Beside me, the former Imperial fist watched the kneeling ruin with a heavy stillness. "Some cannot bear to remember," he said. I nodded. The words landed like a diagnosis. Memory was both burden and medicine. Too much too quickly could kill. We had spent so long letting Grandfather's affection drown our pasts, submerging names, vows, reasons, until we became easier to shape, easier to direct, easier to keep within the comfortable groove of the cycle. And in that ease, we had become smaller than we were meant to be, smaller than even he intended. I knelt beside the shattered plague marine and laid my palm against his forehead, the living emblem pressing through my skin like a seal. "Rest," I told him quietly. "Return to the turning. If there is another life after this one, perhaps next time you will be strong enough to carry what you saw." Under my touch, his form did not rot in the usual ugly surrender. Instead, he came apart with a strange grace, as if his body had decided to become wind. Cells loosened from one another, lifting away like spores on an unseen current. In moments, he was gone. Only his armor remained, collapsed and empty, purposeless, without a self inside it. I stood and faced the construct and the two awakened warriors at my side. "We cannot linger," I said. "The garden felt this. The disturbance will travel. Grandfather will know." The former Alpha Legionnaire, newly reclaimed, newly named, tilted his head. "Will he oppose us?" "I don't know," I admitted. "His mind is not ours. His purposes are simpler than we can grasp, and more complex than we can survive. He may call this betrayal. He may call it growth. He may end us or elevate us. We will only learn the truth by meeting him." "And if he ends us?" the Imperial Fist asked, voice steady. I felt the ruined muscles of my face draw into something like a smile. Then we return to the cycle, but we return having chosen. In a universe where gods and mortals alike are chained to forces they pretend are destiny, that is not nothing. The construct, silent until now, answered in its own way. It did not speak. It did not laugh. Instead, it released a harmonic resonance that traveled through the soil, through the air, through bone and rot and metal alike. It was communication beneath language, emotion and intention delivered with perfect, undeniable clarity. Readiness, resolve, hope. I inclined my head. "Yes," I murmured. "It's time. Time to show Grandfather what his gift had become. Time to offer the Lord of Change by Rot a choice of his own." We began the march toward the garden's heart, toward the great tree with its bells, toward the ring of standing stones where court was held, and judgments were made, and the realm responded. The path did not meander into new nonsense the way it usually did. It straightened. It simplified. It became direct, almost respectful, like the garden itself sensed an unprecedented event and cleared a road to witness it properly. With every step, the emblem in my palm pulsed harder, not with heat, but with urgency. It felt the enormity of what we attempted, approaching a god not as supplicants begging to be noticed, but as agents carrying an outcome. The Imperial Fist and the Alpha Legionnaire flanked me, still swollen with corruption, still riddled with disease and fungal bloom, yet walking with a different posture. Not the slumped obedience of the endlessly blessed, but the squared stance of men who remembered their names. Ahead, the construct led. Its form shifted as it walked, becoming more distinct, more individualized, less a simple extension of my plot, and more a person shaped by intention. Still fluid, still mutable, but no longer formless. Behind us, the change spread. Corpse flowers tore themselves free and followed like a procession of crawling lanterns. Soil rippled into patterns that echoed the triple-strand symbol on my palm. Even the lake of filth altered, its surface clarifying as if mud remembered water. Bodies floating there rose, not as mindless puppets, but as figures pulled upright by remembered purpose. The garden was waking. Not to destruction, not to rebellion, to pure consciousness. To the third path between rigid preservation and blind decay. Purposeful transformation guided by intention instead of habit. We were the spark. We were the variable. We were the beginning of something even warp-born eternity had not accounted for. As the great tree's bells began to toll, whether warning or welcome, I could not tell. The ground shuddered beneath heavy feet. Guardians were moving. Shapes rushed through the haze to intercept us. And still I felt no fear, only certainty, only the weight of choice, freely made. Resistance met us as we drew nearer. Not all of it was hostile. Many denizens watched from the sides, curious, drawn by novelty, drawn by the strange calm that radiated from the construct's harmonic presence. Some stepped in behind the corpse flowers and began to change as they walked, touched by the wave of awareness rolling outward from our small core. Others fled, scrambling for deeper places where older blessings remained thick and unquestioned. But the most devoted, the most lost in the comfort of surrender, attacked. Plague marines surged, Nurglings poured like laughter-made flesh, and larger shapes lumbered in their wake. Ancient servants of disease who could not comprehend a change that didn't come pre-approved by tradition. They saw our march as contamination of the cycle itself. We didn't seek violence. We also didn't avoid it. When confronted, the construct reached out, not to strike, but to offer communion. Many accepted willingly, others were remade despite themselves. Their corruption did not vanish, their diseases continued. The rot remained. But now it had direction. Now it had agency. Those who could not accept what was offered. Those who fought the revelation until it tore them apart. We left behind. Some fell broken. Some dissolved back into the turning. Yet even in them, A seed had been planted, the notion of remembrance. In time, even that could grow. As we neared the great tree, the resistance thickened into a wall. A host of plague-bearers formed a barrier across the path, single eyes glaring with sharp malice. Rusted blades rose together. They chanted in unison, a damp, grinding dirge meant to smother the construct's resonance. The garden rejects. The garden expels. The cycle preserves. The Father protects. Behind them loomed something larger, an immense, great unclean one, bloated with ecosystems of disease. Its face wore a grandfatherly mask of disappointment, as if scolding a wayward grandchild. "Little apothecary," it called, voice like bodies left too long in open air. "Little carrier of doubt, little bearer of questions. Why disturb the garden's peace? Why interrupt the turning? The great Father gave you a gift, and you repay him with sedition." I stepped forward, palm raised, emblem pulsing like a second heart. "There is no rebellion here," I said. "Only growth, only evolution, only the natural consequence of the gift, tended according to my nature, according to my choice." The demon's expression tightened. Calculation replaced concern. "Choice," it echoed, as if tasting something bitter. Always this fixation, as though choice were anything but an illusion. Comfort for mortals too small to accept cosmic force. "If choice is illusion," I countered, "then why gifts at all? Why transformation instead of erasure? Why service instead of simple consumption? Chaos itself implies alternatives. Without choice, there is only order, only stasis, only death without rebirth." The great unclean one shifted, uneasy. Philosophy was not its native element. Action was. "Enough," it growled. "The garden rejects you. Return to your plot and dismantle what you've nurtured, or face consequences." I looked past it to the great tree beyond, bells calling more witnesses. Grandfather himself was not present, yet his attention pressed down like weather. This was a powerful servant, but it spoke with its own certainty, not with Nurgle's voice. "We will pass," I said simply. "We will stand before the Great Father directly. Let him decide whether this is abomination or evolution." The demon roared. Plague-bearers surged, bodies forming a wall of putrid flesh, blades raised, and hesitated. Because the construct stepped forward and its resonance deepened, shaking the garden's fabric like a struck bell. It did not touch them one by one. It expanded. It became a wave. Transformative force washed over the advancing line. The plague-bearers wailed, not from pain, but from shock, from recognition, from a sudden remembering that hit them like light in a sealed room. When the wave receded, they remained diseased, still leaking rot, still warped by Grandfather's blessings. But their posture had changed. They stood as if they had decided to stand. Their single eyes blinked as though seeing the garden for the first time. "What have you done?" the great unclean one demanded, voice edged with something close to fear. "Reminded them," I answered, "of what they were, of what they might become, and of the choice that exists, whether they acknowledge it or not." The transformed plague-bearers turned as one and faced their former master. They did not strike. They did not threaten. They simply stood there, awakened consciousness forming a barrier made of quiet refusal. The demon lifted its massive cleaver as if to cut them down, and paused. To destroy them would be to admit fear. To admit fear would be to admit the legitimacy of what they had become. And that legitimacy would force a question no servant built from unquestioning devotion could afford to hold for long. In that hesitation, the construct moved. It flowed through the ranks of the awakened like water through reeds and reformed before the great unclean one in a shape taller, more defined, more certain. Its once blank face began to hint at features, not human, not Astartes, not mortal. They shifted like reflections in disturbed water. For a heartbeat I saw Grandfather's kindly visage there, then my own face as it once was. Then a cascade of countless plague victims, a kaleidoscope of suffering and acceptance, resistance and surrender. The construct extended its hand. The great unclean one roared defiance and swung. The cleaver carved through the construct's shoulder and emerged from its back in a spray of impossible fluids. Colors that did not belong together. But the wound sealed instantly. The blade lodged, trapped in living substance, and still the hand continued forward, inexorable. Contact. The demon howled, not in pain, but in revelation. The communion lasted longer than any before. Seconds stretched into minutes. The garden went still, as if holding its breath. The bells fell silent. Only the construct's harmonic resonance remained, rising and falling in patterns that felt like meaning beyond language. When at last they separated, the great unclean one stood changed, not smaller, not weakened, clarified. Its body was still bloated, still crawling with disease, but it carried itself with a dignity that somehow pierced its own rot. Its eyes, once clouded with mindless malice, now shone with awareness and with memory. "I remember," it said, and its voice had deepened into something resonant, layered, carrying echoes of what it had been before becoming a demon. "I was Septimus Dra," it continued, "Magos Biologis of the Adeptus Mechanicus. I sought to master disease through knowledge. I believed I could control life by measuring it." It looked down at its massive hands, at the ecosystems writhing across them. "I failed. My plagues escaped. They consumed my forge world. And when the ruin was complete, the Great Father found me. He offered communion beyond control, understanding beyond data. I accepted, and I forgot why I began." Its gaze rose to mine. Recognition, almost respect, sat in its ruined features. "I studied disease not to worship decay for its own sake," it said slowly, as if learning its own truth again, "but to understand life's resilience, to see decay as a chapter in a larger process, not the whole book." Then it turned toward the tree, toward the stones, toward the place Grandfather would appear. "He awaits," it announced. "He has felt the ripples. He is curious." "Curious?" I echoed before I could stop myself. The transformed demon made a sound that might have been laughter. "He is beyond simple anger. He is decay and rebirth given shape. Change is his nature, though he expresses it in cycles. He does not fear transformation. He embodies it." With the awakened Lord of Contagions now at the head of our procession, remaining resistance melted away. Denizens of the garden parted. Some fled. Some watched. Many joined. By the time we reached the standing stones around the great tree, our small group had become an army of the awakened. The clearing was empty when we arrived. The stone circle stood silent. The bells hung still. The air felt charged, as if the garden itself waited. We did not wait long. Reality rippled. My enhanced vision blurred, refocused, and then he was there, seated upon a throne of compressed bone and rotting vegetation at the tree's base. Nurgle, the Great Father, vast enough to dwarf even the transformed demon, a universe of corruption contained in flesh. His face wore that familiar mask of grandfatherly concern, yet his eyes held depth that had watched civilizations rise and fall, stars ignite and die, the long dance of decay and renewal continuing since before time bothered to count itself. "My children," he greeted, and his voice sounded like life crawling out of death, like hope born from collapse. "My curious, questioning children, what transformation have you brought into my garden?" I stepped forward. The emblem in my palm pulsed in time with the many hearts beating within his colossal chest. And for the first time since my hands were clean and my vows were simple, I felt the full weight of who I had been, who I was, and what I was choosing to become, standing before a God not to beg, but to speak. The construct kept pace at my shoulder as I stepped into the circle of stones. It no longer looked like a lump of living tissue pretending to be human. It had settled into a face, if face was even the right word, stitched together from echoes. A hint of my old severity, a trace of the Imperial fist's hard lines, the Alpha Legionnaire's unreadable calm, the softened sorrow of countless unnamed dead. Not one identity. A convergence. A principle wearing a body. I met grandfather's gaze and found to my surprise that my voice did not tremble. "Great Father," I said, "I did what you asked. I tended your gift. I followed where it pulled." Nurgle leaned forward, his vastness shifting with an ease that mocked gravity. His attention was a weight and a warmth at once, like a hand placed on your shoulder, heavy enough to break you, gentle enough to promise you won't fall. "And what did my faithful apothecary find?" he asked, amusement and interest braided together. "What flower grew from your doubts?" I lifted my palm so the emblem could be seen, no longer merely the prime helix, but its altered descendant, the old spiral made strange by a third strand weaving between the two. "It grew into this," I said, "the proof that even gods aren't finished, that the cycle doesn't have to be blind, that decay can be guided, that transformation can be chosen." The clearing went still. The bells on the great tree hung silent, as if listening. Nurgle's expression did not harden into wrath. It deepened into something more dangerous. Patient curiosity. "Brave words," he rumbled. "Beautiful concepts. But tell me, what do they do? How does this change the garden? How does it change you? How does it change me?" Before I could answer, the construct stepped forward. It mirrored Nurgle's movement without fear, closing the distance until its newly set features hovered near the god's grandfatherly mask. Creator and creation. Force and idea. The garden's old rule and its new possibility. For a long moment, they simply regarded one another, and the silence felt like a blade held against the throat of reality. Then the construct spoke, not with a single voice, but with a harmonic chord. Many voices layered into one clean meaning. "It means choice." "Great Father," it said, "not the thin imitation mortals tell themselves to sleep at night. Not obedience or rebellion, not surrender or resistance." Its tone did not accuse. It stated, "There is a third way. Conscious participation in the cycle. Evolution with intention." Nurgle laughed, and the sound rolled through the clearing like a warm storm. The branches of the great tree shook. Bells began to toll again, not as a warning, more like applause. "Huh?" he boomed, delighted. "To imagine that small minds might steer their own becoming. To imagine that the shaped might shape the shaping." His hand swept outward, indicating the garden in all its endless contradictions. "This place is my expression," he said. "My realm, my design. Where does mortal choosing fit into that?" "Everywhere," I answered, and the words came out sharper than I expected. "Because this realm isn't only yours, it's built from us." A hush rippled through the gathered host. Demons and plague marines and warped tenders all held still, some with fascination, some with sudden dread. Speaking to a god was one thing. Speaking to a god as if reminding him of a truth he'd rather keep unspoken was another. "You exist because we exist," I continued, not raising my voice, not needing to. "Because mortal minds fear sickness, because we grieve loss, because we try to understand endings. Your power is real, Great Father, yet it is also symbiotic. You are shaped by our interpretation as surely as we are shaped by your touch." It should have earned me annihilation. Instead, Nurgle grew quiet, thoughtful, almost wistful. "There is truth in that," he admitted at last. "A truth most of my children never notice. They drown happily in acceptance. They cling to the easy joy of surrender." He leaned back. The throne at the tree's base creaked under him, not from strain, but as if the wood and bone were shifting to accommodate a new idea. "But what would you have me do with that truth?" he asked. "How do I change?" "I who am change, made flesh." The construct extended its hand, the same hand that had offered communion to attackers and doubters and lost soul. It offered it now to a god, Not change as great father, the construct replied. Evolve, expand, become more fully what you already are. Its harmonic voice softened, almost tender. Not merely the ending of things, the becoming that follows. Not mindless rot for rot's sake, but transformation with meaning. Nurgle stared at the offered hand. Genuine surprise crossed his features, an expression so rare it felt like the garden itself flinched. In all the cycles of his existence, who had ever offered to elevate the Lord of Decay? Who had ever dared suggest the Creator might learn from the created? The clearing froze. Even the newly awakened Lord of Contagions watched as if afraid to blink. For a breath that seemed to stretch into ages, the garden held its lungs. Then Nurgle laughed again, louder, warmer, more genuinely delighted than before. Magnificent, he chuckled. In all my cycles, I have never met such glorious presumption. He reached out. One massive, bloated hand engulfed the construct's offered limb entirely. I accept, Nurgle said, eyes bright with curiosity. Let us see what communion becomes when it flows both ways. The moment their flesh met, the world broke open. Not shattered, rewritten. A shockwave erupted from the point of contact and rolled outward across the clearing, across the garden, across everything that believed it understood what this place was. It wasn't heat. It wasn't light. It was a revision. A force that touched meaning itself. I was lifted off my feet. The wave caught my consciousness and expanded it beyond my corrupted body, beyond the narrow channel of Astarte's senses. For an instant that contained entire eras, I perceived the garden as a whole. Every plot, every tender, every whispering spore, every bell, every ripple on the lake. And beyond the garden I felt the warp's vastness, and beyond that the cold shape of real space. Stars, worlds, wars, prayers, each one a nerve in the same living organism. I saw the cycle clearly, not as an argument between life and death, but as a single process wearing different masks. Endings giving shape to beginnings, beginnings giving meaning to endings. Partners, not enemies. And I saw Nurgle in a way my mortal mind had never managed before. Not merely a grotesque figure of plague and despair, but a concept that had learned to feel. A natural force, awakened by the accumulated psychic pressure of countless beings trying to make peace with their own mortality. I felt something else too, his loneliness, his affection that was not a lie, not an act, but a genuine hunger to be understood. A desire to hold his creations close because he could not bear to watch them vanish without leaving a trace. The wave receded. Reality returned, but it returned altered. The garden around us wasn't clean. It wasn't purified. It wasn't saved in any imperial sense. It was purposeful. The chaotic drift of mindless decay had been replaced by structured complexity, like a wild ecosystem that had discovered intention without losing its wildness. Rot still happened. Disease still flourished. The cycle still turned. But now it turned with awareness of itself. Nurgle had changed. He was still bloated, still a universe of corruption, still the grandfather of flies and fevers, yet his body now pulsed with patterns, plagues arranged like currents in a river rather than random storms. Corruption that flowed with direction rather than simple appetite. His face held the same grandfatherly softness, but behind it was an expression of deep comprehension, wisdom not born of knowledge, but born of the willingness to let the old version of oneself rot away. And the construct had evolved too. It grew in stature until it stood as Nurgle's equal. Not identical, not mirrored, but paired. An entity born from the meeting of God and concept, decay and meaning, cycle and choice. Its features now carried traces of Nurgle's own visage, just as Nurgle's new patterns echoed the construct's deliberate complexity. The former Lord of Contagions, once Septimus Dare, spoke in awe. "What happened?" Nurgle answered, and his voice had changed. It still carried the wet warmth of decomposition, but now it contained layers, harmonics, like multiple truths spoken in one sound. "Everything," he said, "and nothing." The bells overhead chimed softly, as if agreeing. "The cycle remains," Nurgle continued. "Decay still becomes rebirth, but now the turning knows itself. My children still serve, but now they may serve with choice, not merely surrender." He looked down at me. His gaze was both intimate and cosmic, like a star leaning close enough to see your breath. "And you, my apothecary," he said gently, "my doubt-bearer, my question-keeper, what will you choose now?" The question did not feel like a test. It felt like a door being opened. "Will you remain," Nurgle asked, "and tend your plot with this new understanding? Will you return to real space, to those trapped in false binaries, and carry this third path into their wars and prayers? Or will you ascend here, becoming something more than mortal, more than corrupted, more than chosen?" I looked at my palm. The emblem pulsed there, no longer a reminder of broken vows, but a living map of what I had learned. I looked at Septimus Dra, reborn into dignity without losing his rot. I looked at the awakened host, plague-bearers and tenders now standing with a different posture, no longer slumped into fate. I looked at the construct, now an entity in its own right, not my pet miracle, but a companion idea given will. And I realized something quietly staggering. To be offered choice, real choice, was itself a kind of ascension. To understand the cycle, rather than merely drown in it, was its own transcendence. "I choose to remember," I said at last. Not a slogan, a commitment. I choose to carry both my past and my present, both my loyalty and my corruption, both my purpose and my nature. My voice steadied further as I spoke. I choose the threshold. I choose to stand between, not fully mortal, not fully divine, not purely of the Imperium or the warp. I lifted my hand slightly, the emblem gleaming with subtle life. "I choose to be a bridge." Nurgle nodded, satisfaction radiating from him like warmth from compost. "A necessary role," he said. "A worthy choice." He gestured, and reality flexed around me like muscle. "Then I will give you what you need to fulfill it," he said. Knowledge poured into me, not as mindless corruption, not as blissful surrender, but as something refined. Perspective, understanding, the ability to hold contradictions without being torn in half by them. Power flowed through my ruined body, and did not merely rot it further. It reorganized. I felt myself becoming something that could exist in overlapping states. One foot in the warp, one in real space, perception layered like transparent parchment. Not apotheosis in the triumphant sense, not damnation in the helpless sense. A third category, a body designed for translation. When it was finished, I stood renewed, yet still flawed, still marked, still imperfect, still honest. I was Malchus, once an apothecary of the Death Guard, now a walker between worlds, between meanings, between destinies, pretending they aren't choices. "The garden welcomes you in this role," Nurgle announced, and his voice carried outward to all who listened. "And the Imperium awaits your return." He leaned forward slightly, and his tone softened as if speaking to a favored grandchild. "Carry what you have learned to those who still cling to false oppositions," he said. "Order versus chaos, life versus death, preservation versus decay. Teach them the harmony beneath the argument, when they are ready." I bowed, not in worship, in acknowledgement of the task. "I will," I promised, "to those who question, to those who are tired of the lie that there are only two roads." Behind me, Nurgle turned to the assembled throng, the countless denizens who had watched the garden change beneath their feet. "My children," he declared, "a new cycle begins, not replacing the old, enriching it, complicating it, making it alive again. Each of you faces the same question," he said. "Will you remember? Will you awaken? Will you choose?" The garden trembled with the magnitude of that invitation. Some surged forward eagerly. Some recoiled, desperate for the comfort of simple surrender. Some hesitated, caught between old bliss and new responsibility. And that diversity, those different answers, felt like the true fulfillment of what had begun in my plot. Not one path, many, not a binary, a continuum. As I stepped away from the stone circle, the transformed garden stretching without end around me, I felt the weight of my new role settle over my shoulders. Not a burden, a purpose. Not a sentence, an opportunity. The road ahead was not straight, not clean, not guaranteed. It was a road I would build with each choice. Behind me, grandfather's laughter echoed, genuine joy at the birth of new possibilities within an eternal turning. Beside him, the construct, now his equal in its own way, added its harmonic resonance to the sound, and the music didn't destroy reality. It shaped it. In my palm, the emblem pulsed steadily, a reminder as constant as a heartbeat. Even in corruption, there is agency. Even in decay, there is direction. Even in damnation, there can be meaning, if one dares to choose it. I am Malchus. I remember. I choose. I become